to know about COVID-19.
Stay tuned to 702.
It's 28 minutes to 10 o'clock and Dr. Graeme Codrington is my guest. He is futurist and expert on the future of work at Tomorrow Today. And we are going to be speaking about the phenomenon of fake news. You will remember that over the weekend, very, very well-respected news platform, News 24, had to apologize for a fake news story that they published around the issue of vaccines that were going to ostensibly be carried out, or vaccine testings that were going to be carried out here in South Africa, and a story that they published without really researching and getting the facts, ultimately publishing fake news. But that story was on the back of another controversial issue that was about a conversation between two French doctors who suggested, in a very demeaning and disparaging way, that if there are going to be any vaccine tests for COVID-19, they should happen to Africa in the same way that the vaccine tests for HIV were carried out on sex workers. And many people got angry about that. And what that did is that it created a particular whirlpool of opportunities for fake news. Secondly, we heard of the gentleman who had been spreading the story that the testing kits that were coming to South Africa from various parts of the world had already been contaminated, and so forth and so forth. And in that environment and context of fear and anxiety, those kinds of narratives can get very, very difficult. Many places in the world have declared fake news illegal, with some serious prosecutions if you are found guilty of that. And to talk to me about that is Dr. Graeme Codrington. Dr. Graeme Codrington, thank you very much for joining us. I really appreciate your time. I want to talk about the issue of fake news, not necessarily just from a moral or ethical point of view, but from a practical point of view. I say this because sometimes when we have moral or ethical conversations, the relativity of that sometimes makes people roll their eyes. I want to talk about it from a practical, real point of view. And I've given some examples of some of the issues that have, been raised over this weekend. What are your thoughts?
Well, I agree with you, Aubrey, that, that it's the practical issue now that's the most important. But you might have to rescue me from turning this into a psychological therapy session, because I'm going crazy at the moment with the amount of stupid and crazy that's coming across, especially our social media channels. I mean, the virus is one thing, but these conspiracy theories and fake news that are being spread around is something to behold at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah. So the one big story that I've seen, of course, was the News 24 retraction and apology, and very sad story that a platform that reputable could be lured into the seduction of fake news in that way. Talk to us about what are the circumstances around it, and what is the danger? What is the exponential danger of that kind of fake news?
Well, let's understand what exactly fake news is. Obviously, this is a phrase that Donald Trump has been using for a while, and now lots of people are just using it for almost everything. There are people who are deliberately making up false information, disinformation. So it's not just something where you maybe misheard something and then you pass that information on. I don't know, honestly, you'd have to speak to some kind of criminal psychologist to understand the mindset, because I just can't get my mind to the space where someone will sit down and say, how can I develop a video or a news story that looks real but is definitely fake, and it is designed to cause harm.
Yeah.
And, that's the issue. Some of these things, April Fool's Day and that, they come out with fun stories and it's meant to trick people, but it's meant to be lighthearted. And when you discover you've been tricked, you just feel a little bit silly and then you laugh. But this information at the moment is honestly designed to harm people. Take the one with the guy who was saying that the test kits coming to South Africa are contaminated. He then went on to say, so you must refuse to be tested. If somebody comes, a health worker comes to your community and says, can I test you for COVID-19? You must refuse. And there were so many people who picked that story up and said, I will refuse to be tested. Yeah. I mean, honestly, I don't even think you and I need to explain to people how damaging and dangerous.
But I think we do, Graeme. But I think we do. I think we do. I desperately believe that we do. I'll tell you why. I come from a community where people started to believe actively that nonsense, that when the health workers come, you must stop them. You must refuse to be tested because there is some sort of a global conspiracy to kill us as black people with this whole thing. And here's the danger and the painful danger with that. These are communities that are marginalized economically speaking. The space is not there. Many of them don't have the water. Should this virus catch fire there, it will be devastating. It will kill people in the millions.
Absolutely.
And so I think that it is critical for people to understand. It's devastatingly critical for people to understand that when such lies go out that you should refuse to be tested, that is designed to create a genocide of our people. And that reason is why I think, but no, we need to explain it. We need to say it expressly because that is the sum total of the lie, And
thank you. I mean, that's exactly right. Yeah. And, let's think that there are some people out there, and it's a very small number of people who'd want to cause this type of harm. The harm includes health harm. It includes dividing white people from black people. Yes. It includes, there's all sorts of issues going on in the background for those people. Then there are the people who, and here we can be a little bit charitable. We are all deeply anxious, deeply stressed at the moment. There's, our world has literally been turned upside down in some places. Our livelihoods, our futures have big question marks over them. And in that moment, the psychology behind it, I'm not a psychologist, but I've tried to understand this and spoken to psychologists to try and understand exactly what drives people to fake news and conspiracy theories. And it's got to do with some form of answer. Where does this virus come from? Why is it doing this? What's happening? It doesn't make sense to me. So you know what? I'm going to grab onto something, anything that sounds like it even if it doesn't really make sense, it sounds like it gives me an answer for where this thing comes from. Yeah. And so people are spreading it because they want to have some control. Yes. They want to be involved. Let's even be very charitable. There's some people who spread this message because they think, well, if this is true, then people should hear about it. And so we can't just say that it's everybody is trying to cause harm. Yeah. Some people are genuinely thinking they're doing the right thing. Yeah. But honestly, just as you were saying, they cannot fathom the harm that they could cause. These are not April Fool's pranks. These are things that will influence people's lives and change our world and cause harm in our world. So it really is that serious, and we have to take it seriously. And I agree with the governments of the world that have made this illegal, literally put laws in place to say you can't do it. So the guy who put that video out that said the tests were contaminated, He was arrested by the police. He went to court today. He's been let out with a warning and told that he has to come back after lockdown. I think it's sometime in July. His court date is set for. And let's hope that's enough of a lesson for him that he just keeps quiet for the next little while. I somehow doubt it, but let's hope that's enough for now.
Let me just quickly jump in there, Graeme. I understand and I sympathize with the desire to have some sort of control in a situation where one feels out of control. The lack of knowledge around the virus and how it behaves from some of our top professionals is scary because I think all of us, as you've explained, start to feel very vulnerable. And I get the psychology behind wanting to have some sort of a narrative in my head that makes me feel like I understand and therefore I'm in control. I get that. And I suppose that's why you're saying perhaps in that instance we need to be a little more generous in understanding the motivations behind some of the spreading of that information. But I do want to also juxtapose that with the consequence of that, even if the reasons are understandable. The consequence of that, as I understand it, is that once again, it makes people complacent in a situation where people need to be very, very vigilant. So, for example, if there is the story that says, and again, from where I come from, and it comes out as crudely as that says, no, man, this thing is not a thing for us as black people. It's a disease that is only going to catch white people. That's how crudely it sometimes comes out. And it's not all over the place, but anybody that is honest that knows that I'm telling the truth. There are people that are peddling the story that don't worry about this thing, man. This thing is a disease that kills only white people and Chinese people. Okay. So we don't have to worry about this. And then more and more people become complacent because of the psychology that you've just explained. But what is the potential devastation that it can cause? So while I understand your generosity in the reason why some of the false news, let's call it that, happens, it can be very, very devastating.
Yeah, and look, that is why literally there is now a law in place. And people do need to understand that it isn't only the people who create these fake news stories and these videos in the first place who are going to be prosecuted. If you even share that video on a WhatsApp group, you can be reported. And you will be liable as well. And so you asked me right at the beginning, can we be practical about this? So let me be practical. I want to give you a 5-point test.
Sure.
That we can use. And I think this is a very simple thing. Everybody should just write this down and remember it. If somebody shares a piece of information with you, and whether it's a video or a news story or a link or something, please, just right now, especially at the moment, with all of the anxiety and the stress and how quickly things move and all of this, just ask 5 simple questions. The first question is there a name on the video or the story? A lot of these stories that get spread, there's no name of a journalist. You know, or if you put something out on air, it goes out under your name. It's your show. Sure. When it gets shared on a podcast, it's got your name on it. If a journalist writes something, it's got a name. And we know who wrote it. It's not anonymous. Why would you put out genuine information that's useful for the public anonymously? What would be the point of that? So does it have a name attached to it? Secondly, is there a date on it? I mean, the number of things. I saw a video last week of people running into a shop, and it was a little bit unclear what they were doing, but it looked as if they were looting the shop and grabbing stuff, and it was labeled, "This is happening in the Western Cape," you know? And then I kind of did a little bit of tracking back. I've got a little piece of software that can search for videos and images online and find them. And I found, no, this video comes from another country from 2016, and it had to do with a robbery that was happening in a shopping center. And, you know, you just say, there's no name, there's no date on this video. Don't share it then, because it might be a historical reference, it might be something else. And again, if you're trying to put out good information, why would you not put a date stamp on it and link it properly? The third question you ask is, are there sources for the information that is put? So let's take that Bill Gates example. So the conspiracy theory is Bill Gates wants to test vaccines on Africans. Well, can you give me a link? Not a link to some kind of xyz.com website or link to a YouTube video. Can you link me to the Bill Gates Foundation website? Can you link me to 702 EWN? Can you link me to, now, sadly, in this case, News 24 let us down, but they found their mistake. They've retracted it, because we should be able to trust our top news sources. And if you don't have a link to a proper news source, or preferably to the original person themselves, you find a website that's called BillGates.com and you've got a video of him saying this, fine, then I'm going to believe it, otherwise not. So we've got, do you have a name? Is there a date? Are there sources on there? Then the fourth question you must ask yourself is, have I checked it with a fact-checking website? So here you've got Africa Check, you've got Snopes, you've got all sorts of websites. Because you can do a Google search and you'll find all the conspiracy theories on the web. But there are websites like Snopes and Fact Check and Africa Check that do a really good job of actually verifying. Journalists and researchers looking at this conspiracy theories and checking them. Have you checked it? And then finally, have you seen this information in two different sources? And this is the least, this is the one that's the least concerning for us as normal citizens. I know for you guys as journalists, you're trained to make sure you've got two verifiable sources. But at least for us, we should still at least ask the question, have I seen it in two places that I trust? Not your Uncle John, or your auntie. I'm not talking about those two people. I'm talking about, verifiable news sources. Now, some people might be thinking, well, I don't have the time to go and check all of this stuff before I share. Well, then my answer to you is, if you don't have the time to check it, then don't share it. Then you shouldn't have the time to share it either. Yeah. We must be verifying information in these crazy times. And so hopefully that's helpful.
I think that is very, very helpful.
Sources, checked it, and multiple sources.
Yeah. I want to take a quick call from Kaz in KwaZulu-Natal. Kaz, good evening to you. What is on your mind, sir?
Hi, good evening. Good. I just want to find out, man, when the government wants people to go out in the communities to check on people if they are testing positive or what, we don't know how they do it. That video of the guy in Cape Town with the earbud in his nose. Now, we don't know the care of the earbud. Are they individually wrapped? Are they how do they dispose of it? Is that the real process? That we in the dark as well. So maybe a bit more information regarding, if somebody comes to my house to test me, what is the process? I was a bit worried about that.
So your concern, and I think that's a valid, and it makes sense that with all of the uncertainty there is, Cass, how much do we need to know about the process of testing that is going to give us a sense of security, even though we are in agreement with the idea that people need to be tested in order for us to understand the levels of infection in the country, but you are questioning how safe is the process, I suppose, yeah?
Yeah, what do they do? And the second point I want to make right now is, the amount of... Sorry, I tried to get masks for me and my family, and I couldn't access them. I had to go to a chemist. Obviously, I had to pay for it, and these were just clocked. I just saw them manufacturing things like that they're not stuff that is actually worn by doctors. I just see them manufacturing things out of anything and everything. And I couldn't access them. I wonder if other people can access them. Is their chemists out of stock?
All right. All right. I don't want to move away from the specific conversation that we're having about fake news, but I hear what you're saying, Graeme.
But Aubrey, let me come in here because Kaz's questions really do help us understand this conversation. You see, when somebody goes in, this is maybe a dangerous way to phrase this, but if somebody really wants to make a good fake news story or a good conspiracy theory, you don't do something that's so completely crazy nobody believes you.
Yeah.
What you do is you take the germs of truth, if you like, little bits of truth. So let's be fair. There was a factory in Luxembourg a week ago that makes testing kits. And they discovered that a few hundred of the testing kits that they were making had become contaminated. Yeah. So obviously when you make a testing kit, you also have to test the testing kit. So it's a quality control. Yes. And so they do have COVID-19 virus available in their factory so that they can put it on a test kit and see if the kit works. Yeah. And they discovered, before any of these kits left the factory, before anything happened, they discovered that a few of the kits, a few hundred, had been contaminated. Those kits didn't go anywhere. They didn't leave the factory. This shouldn't have anyway been a news story. It's just a problem the factory had on one day of their production. They found the problem. They fixed the problem. Even if those contaminated kits had left, the contamination doesn't affect you as a person when you are tested with the kit. It simply means that it gives you a positive every time you use the test. So if somebody uses a contaminated test on you, Aubrey, it simply says you have COVID-19, whether you do or not. It doesn't give you COVID. Yeah. That's not what the contamination is. It just means the test is broken rather than you get it. Now, that's the fact. That's what actually happened. Now, you take that information, you leave off just a few little pieces of information, and then suddenly someone like Kaz and people across our country hear little bits of news that sound real. They've heard half of the real story, and they put two and two together, and then these question marks emerge. And you can hear in Kaz's question and in his tone, he's nervous. Of course he's nervous. Yeah. Nobody wants to be contaminated by the person who's supposed to be testing you. So his questions are not invalid. Yeah. And obviously, if somebody comes around to your community to test you, make sure you check that the test that they take out is properly sealed. I don't know exactly how the tests are done, but I can't imagine they are not very carefully controlled. So ask that question. But don't go the next step to say, you are coming to contaminate my community and the governments are out to get us. You know, valid questions are good and valid. Sure. But when they move into conspiracy and fake news, that's when they become dangerous. Yeah.
I think a very, very powerful point to make, to say that in order for a lie to be effective, it has to have smidgens of truth in it, right? It's got to have, because I suppose people have somehow an inner intuitive ability to recognize some form of truth. And once that truth detector says yes, it's very, very easy then to think that the rest of the story is a yes, when in fact that's the strategy of the lie, to use a little bit of the truth to spread the lie. Here's the issue that I think Kaz's call also highlights. That there's nothing wrong with asking questions, and there's also nothing wrong with debate about specific issues. The issue is when the intent is malicious, whether we know it or not. Yeah. Because I think that the effectiveness of fake news is mostly amongst those that don't know. Those that do know are usually the originators of the fake news. They know what they're doing. But the effectiveness of fake news is when somebody hasn't had the debate or the conversation, heard the conversation that you and I are having now, to say that, no, you can ask those field workers to show you the fact that those test kits are sealed. And if they don't want to do that, then you've got every right to refuse. No legitimate medical field worker is going to refuse to show a potential patient the the bona fides, the things that'll make your rest easy. So you should be able to ask questions. You should be able to debate. But it shouldn't be so that you put yourself and other people's lives in danger.
Absolutely. And I'll add one thing to what you've said, though, just to add a caveat to that. And that is that truth does not require your vote. Truth is not dependent on how many people believe it.
Yep.
So the fact that 25 of your best friends and everybody on your pub WhatsApp group is asking the question doesn't make the answer right or wrong. The answer is right or wrong on verifiable facts and science. And that's why you've got to go back to the original sources. You've got to look for verifiable information. And scientists are always very happy to be proved wrong. In fact, I've never met a scientist who doesn't enjoy the fact that they put a theory forward, somebody questions it, and that allows them to update and upgrade their information. So asking questions is not wrong, but just because you don't like the answer doesn't mean that you are right.
Graeme Codrington, thank you very much for joining us. I really appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you.
Much appreciated. Futurist and expert at the on the future of work at Tomorrow Today, Dr. Graeme Codrington.